just think about, the Montessori schools where we send our kids for training. A 3-year-old kid, 2.5-year-old kid, 3.5-year-old kid. We send them to a Montessori training. Do you think that with all our master's degree and with a PhD, will we be able to teach in a Montessori school? Whether Montessori school will accept us as a teacher? No. You can't teach in a primary school, you can't teach in a middle school, you can't teach in a high school. But then with your master's degree and PhD, you can immediately get into a law school and go into a classroom and then start teaching them. This is what happened to me. I never had any formal training to teach law when I first entered a classroom long time back. That's because it was never felt that there is a need to train people before we send them to a classroom. I'm surprised that even today UGC insists on clearing the NET examination to join teaching. I do not know how writing a NET examination with multiple choice questions and clearing that examination will make you a great teacher. It's surprising. You will not give an Airbus 320 to an MTech graduate who had cleared NET examination and ask him to fly the flight from Delhi to Chennai. You will not give him 180 passengers and ask him to fly an Airbus just because he has an MTech in aeronautical science and he has cleared an UGC NET examination with multiple choice questions on aeronautical science. But I do not know. When it comes to law teaching in the law schools, you find that you have a master's degree in law and then 180 students in 3 sections are given to you to teach, to take them. You help them guide through. So this is something which I find it a situation which requires our immediate attention, and therefore something has to be done to equip our teachers by imparting them the skills of teaching. And you all know that there is no formal institutional mechanism available in our country to ensure adequate and appropriate training for law teachers. All these orientation programs, these refresher courses, this FDP, all these things, they don't focus as such on teaching methods, but then rather they will be a refresher of your knowledge of the substantive law, maybe the criminal law or the procedural law or constitutional law. You deal with all these courses. You bring some experts who will speak on the latest developments in constitutional law, or some will speak on competition law, some will speak on corporate law, and then the FDP or the refresher course or the orientation program is over. But this is what you have already learned in the law schools. You have done your master's, you have done your PhD, you have written your thesis. In spite of that, why do you need such courses? Rather, these courses should be used to hone up your skill as a teacher. How do we handle these students in a classroom? And especially ours is a professional course. Law is a professional degree. It ought to be skill oriented. And for imparting skills to the students in the class, you need to possess those skills. But where is the opportunity for us as law teachers to acquire those skills? It doesn't mean that we don't have, because we did not have a training, we don't have great teachers. Yes, we have plenty of them. We have many good, great law teachers, but they are exceptions, and they have become great not by training. They become great by learning all these methods through trial and error. They had to commit a mistake to learn, and then they kept on improving upon themselves. And therefore, programs like this, I think, should focus more on rethinking on the law teaching methods, which is very, very essential. And therefore, I thought that I will take use of this opportunity and I'll try to discuss something which is important with you. Let me share a small PPT which I have made on emphasizing on all these points. I hope you are able to see my screen.
Yes, sir, we are able to see your screen.
Yes, so they present, you are able to see my PowerPoint, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So what does it say?
No more same old, same old. Rethinking law teaching, yes.
Yeah, I think this is something which I thought I should name this presentation like this. We need to rethink about law teaching because whatever we know about law teaching is something different. So this is an opportunity where all of us sit together, and I believe that most of the participants today are teachers, in-service teachers, number one, and maybe there might be some master students who are aspiring to be teachers, and there are even law graduate students who have a dream to be a law teacher in the future. So for all three of you, I think this is the best time to sit and rethink about law teaching. So the point is, we can't continue with the same old method of law teaching. Do you all agree with me?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this is a high time that we need to rethink about the law teaching. So we don't want to keep doing the same thing again and again, right? In fact, I would want to quote Albert Einstein, who said, he defined insanity as doing the same thing again and again and expecting new results. That is insane. That is insanity, according to Einstein. And if we keep doing the same thing again and again, and if we think that we are going to create a new generation of lawyers, so I think that definition applies to us as well. So therefore, it is high time that we need to rethink on law teaching. I'll give you the reason why. These are some of the questions now, most of you, all of you who are seeing this screen, please ask this question to yourself. Do we teach our students what lawyers do? See, read the question properly. I'm not asking what lawyers need to know. I know that we are teaching a little bit of what lawyers should know, a little bit of penal code, little bit of procedural code, little bit of constitutional law, little bit of everything that what the Bar Council asks us to teach. But what lawyers do with that knowledge, do we teach? Just it's a self introspection. You don't need to answer my question. Just do an introspection and see. Only then you will be you will understand the importance of today's presentation and why we are all sitting here spending almost 1.5 hours listening, and we are going to talk about these things. So today spending 1.5 hours, is it worthwhile? So that we need to know. We need to ask this question for ourselves. Are we teaching our students what lawyers do with the knowledge that what they get in the law school? Or at least what the lawyers should do? Because if you start looking at what lawyers are doing, might be something appropriate, something not appropriate. But then, there are certain expectations out of a lawyer. Are we teaching them in our classrooms? So you know very well that for any professional education, it's not only knowledge which is very important. Of course, domain knowledge is the basic. But then the skills associated with the profession is something very, very important. And most important is the attitude which is required to succeed in the profession. But do we as law teachers know about what knowledge is required, what skill sets are required, and what attitude is required to succeed in the legal profession? Do we have any such list? So can someone answer from this audience that are you anyone aware of a list of expectations from a law student? that what knowledge they need, what are the skill sets they need, what are the attitudes that they need. Is there any document which is available which tells us as law teachers that, hey guys, before going to the classroom, please look at this list. This is the checklist that you need to follow, and see that you give knowledge of these things. You give them these skills on this, skills on that, and try and create an attitude, give them this attitude, train them on this attitude. Is there a checklist available today with us?
No, sir.
In fact, please ask all of you, each one of you who are participating, please ask yourself this question: have you come across any such checklist which tells you that these are this set of knowledge, skills, and attitude which is required for a law graduate to succeed in the legal profession, so that that checklist can be of some help to law teachers to understand, okay, what is expected from us? In fact, when I was very fortunate to get a project from the European Union, the Erasmus Plus project, a project which we did along with the University of Deusto, which is the principal investigator of this project, which is an university based at Bilbao in Spain. So we were the Indian partners, and then there were 6 Indian law schools which were partners in this particular project. So we formed a subject area group called the law subject area group to define, and the scope of this project is to identify a list of competencies which a law graduate will possess at the end of his graduate program. So when, fortunately, maybe because I was the oldest member of that particular group, I was elected to be the lead of that group, the chair of the group. Therefore, I was steering that group's activities. And the first thing is, we asked ourselves, and then we asked our friends to see that if there are any ready-made competencies which are available, so that we can immediately put our signatures at the bottom of that page and send it to the European Union. But unfortunately, we could not get any such thing. So we had to work out and come out with a list of competencies. The only thing that what we could get as a guiding, as a matter of guidance, is what in US it is known as the Berkeley factors. Please Google for this Berkeley factors, or maybe you can, because if you Google for Berkeley factors, I think you will get a lot of documents. Use these keywords, 26 lawyering effectiveness factors. You please see the last line on my slide, and Google for this 26 lawyering effectiveness factors. So you will get a document which was prepared by the University of Berkeley, the Berkeley Law School, University of California. And that is why it's known as the Berkeley factors, which is widely recognized now. Even the ABA, the American Bar Association, recognizes these factors, because this was the first exercise which America did. And but of course, we did not look into these things when we made for India. We just kept it aside because we don't want our group to be influenced by the American lawyering effectiveness factors. So we prepared our own competencies. Maybe I will also take some time and request you to help me in drafting these competencies in the process to make this session a little bit interactive. What we can do is right now, maybe each one of you, if you have a pen and paper just next to you, or you can use the chat box in this to write one important knowledge or skill or attitude which is required for the legal profession. You don't need to think and write about 10. Just what according to you is the most important skill, right? Required for succeeding in the legal profession, or what are the attitudes required for the legal profession? So why don't you just spend 2 minutes? Maybe I'll just stop sharing the screen, and then can you guys write it on the chat box?
Yes, sir. We are
Yes, sir.
getting
We are
the.
getting
Yeah,
responses
I
on chat,
think,
sir.
yes. So I can
We are
see,
getting.
yeah, this is a wonderful audience. Yes, I could see very quick response. The people say, communication, knowledge of the subject, persuasive attitude, articulation of thoughts, effective listening, right? Drafting and articulation. One needs to be a very good organizer to be always ready to learn new things. Effective research, good listener. But when did we teach our law students to be a great listener? Do any of our course in the law school talk about listening skills?
Sir,
Do we
I
teach
think,
them?
I'm so sorry for interrupting. I think it's
Please, please.
we have that book on clinical legal education by Dr. Madhav
That's right.
Menon, where
Yes.
we have the effective listening and the techniques required for good client counseling, which
Right.
we at Amity Law School do use and teach
Wonderful.
our students.
Great, great, great. And I wish I should have studied in Amity Law School to have learned all these things. In fact, the problem is not, we have in this country almost 1,700 law schools
Right.
today.
Right.
And out of 1,700 law schools, you have different categories of law schools. You start with national law universities. You have some, traditional university teaching departments.
Right.
You have private universities, many of them are doing great, like Amity, like Symbiosis, like Jindal, like Christ University. These are some of the private universities which have made a mark in legal education. That's because you guys, walk a mile extra to find out a book written by Madhav Menon on clinical legal education and bring it to the classroom, include it in the curriculum and teach it. But most of the law schools do not do it. And then they say that they don't need to do it because Bar Council doesn't ask them to do all these things. So Bar Council gives them an X number of subjects, so they are happy that, okay, we have taught them X number of subjects. And Bar Council subjects can give you only the knowledge. They can't impart the skills or the attitude which is required. I'm happy that I can get a lot of quick response, quick arguing skills, good communication skills, of a lot of things. Oh, good. So it's wonderful getting a lot of response. Now I'll go back to my slide and I'll show you. Uh, uh, is my screen still available?
No, sir, you need to share it again.
Again, okay.
Yes.
Right. So I think now it's available.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, as I told you, as part of this subject area group, as of this Erasmus Plus project on competencies-based education. So a group of 7 law teachers from different parts of the country, from different universities, both public and private, we sat together and we drafted a list of competencies, which we had organized it under knowledge, skills, and attitude. You can just, I don't think I need to read it one by one. I've just displayed it on the screen. Please take 2 minutes in just reading these lines. This slide has 5 competencies which we need to impart. And while reading these competencies, please look at your own curriculum and see that whether we teach them knowledge and understanding of basic legal theories. I think almost every law school will be doing this. Knowledge and understanding of socio-economic and political context and ability to take them into consideration in the creation, interpretation, and application of law. So this is more of a teaching method, like how do you teach a particular topic? How do you, whether you teach them as a law as it is, are you related to the socio-economic and political context in which that particular law was made? which will help you to interpret that law in a particular manner. So this is something, which we need to learn. How do we relate it to the socio-economic and political context for every law which we are teaching it, and then so that it will help the students to interpret it with reference to the context in which the law was made. So this is something, one example. If I can't go into it because we have very limited time, maybe I'll request Major Sharma to give me some more session sometime later to exclusively have a workshop on this.
It will be a great honor. It will be a great honor, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, this I find it very, very important that every law teacher need to be trained on these competencies. And I don't think it will be a 1 hour session or 2 hour session or 3 hour session will be sufficient. In fact, this should be a kind of a workshop, a skill-based workshop, where I want teachers to sit together and then draft it. Maybe when things go normal, I think you can plan for it, or maybe we can jointly also organize along with the Gujarat National Law University. We can do a joint program.
Most certainly, sir. That will be an honor. We will do that, sir.
Yes.
We'll do that.
Right. So I think most of you have read this 5 competencies. Please continue to read. This is about the skills which we need to impart on our students in the class. Legal drafting skills. Capacity to read objectively and interpret legal texts. How do we teach them how to interpret? Capacity to dissect the facts and identify the facts in issue. And capacity to find and apply the law to the facts in issue. Because generally, I don't know, when very few students who are good, who have a passion for mooting, they themselves get trained on these things, reading out a set of facts and identifying the facts in issue, and then applying the law only to the facts in issue, keeping aside the rest of the facts, which is not relevant in deciding the fact in issue. These are something, through moot courts we can do that. And I know many good law schools are already doing it. And capacity to identify the ratio and the obiter. But unfortunately, not many law schools encourage students to read a complete judgment, because we generally go by one particular author, one particular textbook, and wherein the author might have written something, 2 nice lines. Because I have an experience of being an author as well. When I wrote my book on environmental law, I picked up 2 very important lines which I found very catchy, very interesting about environment, where the Supreme Court judge had said, but and it need not be a ratio. It was just an obiter made by a judge, but then when a student reads it without reading the full judgment, he will feel that, oh, Supreme Court said so nice things about this environment, and therefore they come to a presumption, because I don't tell in my book that what had finally happened in that judgment. So they read that, oh, the Supreme Court said that Article 21 includes right to life, you can't pollute air and all these things. The Supreme Court said, but then at the end of the thing, you will see the judgment facilitating development and dismissing that petition, which was filed as a complaint against the pollution. So it's something which you will be able to impart to your student only when you encourage your students to read a complete judgment and then identify the ratio and differentiate from the obiter. Because today I find that there is a lot of obiters occupying a major number of pages in the judgment delivered by the higher courts, both by the High Court and Supreme Court. It has become a fashion, a trend to write whatever they write, whatever they wanted to convey on that particular topic before them. But ultimately, the decision is different, and then you need to really find out what was the reason for such decision. Similarly, these are the other things, identifying the gaps in law and innovate for legal reforms. This is what, which is required. And these are some of the skill sets which we prepared. Ability to plead case effectively, where do we teach them, to stand up and plead? How do we teach them the art of examining and cross-examining witnesses? So how many law schools have this capability, in-house capacity to teach all these things? Or sometimes, how many law schools can afford to bring in an eminent lawyer to a classroom to talk to them? Or how many law schools will have the opportunity to conduct a mock trial where you get an opportunity to examine and cross-examine witnesses in a classroom situation? No, just because we conduct a trial competition, mock trial competition, that doesn't mean that we have imported all our students in the classroom the skills. So when I talk about competencies, I'm talking about each and every student in a school, in a law school who is graduating from that law school. Do we give them, this ability to examine a witness? Do we teach them what questions they need to ask, they should ask, what they should not ask? All these things. Maybe that there will be a brief lecture or a passing mention of leading questions, asking leading questions, but then we don't actually demonstrate on what is a leading question and what are the different kinds of leading question and whatnot. So these are some of the things, just it's a long list. Maybe I can share the presentation later. And some of these attitudes which is required, like ability to practice law without compromising professional ethics. This is something important, like how many hours we set apart in our law school curriculum to tell them this dilemma between, professional ethics and the practice of law. Right. So please read these things. And in fact, this is something, for example, commitment to justice and fairness, capacity to act honestly, diligently and transparently, right? And the ability to work as a legal expert in a transdisciplinary team. How do we, because when these guys go out and work for an MNC and they are part of a team which has a lot of MBAs and a few engineers and one or two lawyers in it, like how do they work as in a team, transdisciplinary team? So these are some of the skill sets that I thought we should discuss about. Similarly, another thing is when we talk about training law teachers, the assessing law student is again an art and a skill. I do not know how many of the law schools train teachers on Bloom's taxonomy before asking them to prepare a question paper. Like what are the cognitive skills associated and how do we assess our learning outcome, right? So is there any training program available on setting a question paper for a law student? Is there any teacher, any participant here who had undergone this training program? Because this is, again, I don't want knowledge should be one way, coming from me to you. No, I want to make use of this opportunity for me to learn from any one of you, because this will help me in fine-tuning my speeches and presentations or training, whatever I will be imparting in the days to come. So please, is there any FDP or any orientation program or a refresher program all of you attended? Was there any training on how to set a question paper?
Yes.
Is there anyone who had attended such training program?
Yes, definitely, sir. In our university on the Bloom's taxonomy, okay, we have had proper programs conducted by one of our directors, okay, who's aware of this. Yes. And he has conducted this program for practically all the faculty members, not only law schools, for all the faculty members. And yes, he has shown us how question papers must be set, the initial question, smaller questions, then little discussions and all. So we do follow that system.
Yes. That's wonderful. Yes, I know that Amity does it, and I know that few universities which have the sciences department and engineering departments, engineering schools. Those universities which has engineering schools, they definitely do it because it is a requirement for them for going for an NBA accreditation. And when they talk about preparing themselves for NBA. I think they undergo a lot of training in writing the program outcome, and in fact, they write the course outcome for each course. And now I have seen the heights that institutions asking their engineering teachers to write even an outcome for lecture. So each lecture, it's outcome based, and therefore they know that what they are actually doing. But standalone law schools do not get an opportunity to train their teachers because we don't have in-house knowledge. That you mentioned, Major Sharma, that you have a director who came and trained, but then this kind of competency is not available in most of the law schools where they can train the law teachers on it. So we just write question papers in the way we wanted it to write. There is no guiding factor and there is no science involved. So this is my worry today, because in fact this is not something new. There is already a branch of science which is available. But then law teachers never took the initiative of learning this, and then we are not trained in this. So that is why I thought that I should bring in this conversation today. Now, coming to the teaching methods, I want again all of you, the participants here today, to answer these questions. So I put 3 questions. One is, do we decide what we teach? Who decides what do we teach? Right. Any answer? So who decides what do we teach? So you will have multiple authorities to mention, like predominantly law schools. The law teachers will answer that it is the bar council which decides what do we teach. Like, for example, if we are teaching today a subject called ADR, who is asking you to teach ADR? So the bar council has introduced a clinical paper, and then they ask you to teach ADR, therefore you are teaching ADR. Sometimes the Supreme Court directs the UGC to make environmental law a compulsory subject to everyone, and therefore environmental law came into our curriculum. So somebody else is deciding for us. Supreme Court, the UGC, sometimes the Bar Council, sometimes the university authorities, because Bar Council standards are minimum standards. So sometimes universities feel that the Bar Council standards are very minimal, which will not be able to equip the requisite skill set to your students, and therefore universities keep adding courses to the law school curriculum. I know Amity teaches a lot of things which is not there, not prescribed by the Bar Council. They are doing it in all good faith that this knowledge, this skill set will help the students studying in Amity to become a great lawyer. So the Board of Studies, the Academic Council of the university decides that, oh yes, let's teach this. Now, coming to the second question, like, why do we teach what we teach? Again, the answer is the same. We teach what we teach because we were asked to teach by the authorities at the university. And the authorities at the university have been asked by the Bar Council or the University Grants Commission. So we don't have much discretion. Of course, universities like Amity gives the teacher discretion to draft your own syllabus. Very few universities, most of the private universities enjoy this autonomy. The NLUs have that autonomy. So we frame our own curriculum, and then we give the teachers the leverage to include or delete topics, whatever they are teaching in that subject. So there, teachers in very few law schools have that freedom or opportunity to decide what do we teach. The third question, how do we teach what we teach? This is something which is completely dependent on the teacher. And nobody is going to tell you that you should go and follow this method of teaching in the classroom while teaching this particular topic. I don't think any university is doing that level of micromanagement. I know that universities will give you a list of subject. Maybe then they might ask you to frame a syllabus, maybe present and then justify that why you are teaching what you are teaching. But how do you teach inside a classroom is completely in your hands. This is applicable to almost all 1700 law schools I'm talking about. You go to a very remote area, there is a tiny law school there, and the teacher there, how he is teaching, the basic structure doctrine is left to him. So he decides how he teaches it. And therefore, this becomes very, very important for all. And therefore, we need to actually know how to teach. And one of the important things that we need to consider before deciding how to teach is that you need to first agree on this image. This image is visible to all of you? Can I get some?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Yes.
It is visible, sir.
Yeah, it's a picture of some 9 animals. It's a picture of some 9 animals there.
Yeah.
So this is based on a study by on learning habits conducted by the Japanese educationalists, which by studying the characteristics of students in a typical classroom. So they have identified or classified based on the behavior of the students that every class will have these animals. Someone, like this is just in a very lighter note. Please don't take these diagrams very seriously. This is an illustration to convey that there will be a student who will behave like a monkey. There will be a student who will sit with his head straight like a horse. There will be a student who will be keeping on barking. You see that there is a thick-skinned animal there. You have a rat, you have a pig, you have a frog. So this reflects the one thing that what we can take home from this image is that everyone in the classroom is not the same. And this is a very, very important thing that a teacher need to realize. Because most of our teachers, when we prepare for teaching, we only keep the front benches in our mind. Our classroom, the way you prepare your lecture is most of the time not inclusive. Again, these are general things. I'm trying to generalize it based upon my little experience. There are exceptions. There might be exceptions who do a very inclusive preparation of your lecture, incorporating things even to engage the last benches in your class. But then generally what teachers do, this is what I'm trying to say that. So first thing is we need to understand that our classroom is not homogeneous. It doesn't have students of same caliber, students coming from same background. So they come from different background with different capabilities, with different background levels of knowledge. Now we can't do much about it. From whatever background they come today, they are all in our class, and we need to cater to each one of them. So this is where I'm just trying to justify the need for this session today. Why are we sitting and talking about this for the last 1 hour? Why are we trying to do all these things? Why is that Major Sharma thought that this topic is very important for teachers, and that is why he had put as the first session of this entire 1 week FTP. So there is a need for us to be trained on new methods of teaching. And therefore, these are some of the things which we need to be convinced that yes, my classroom is not homogeneous. I have different kinds of people from different background with different mental capabilities sitting in my classroom. So how do I cater to them? Because I can't prepare, if there are 60 students in my class, I can't prepare a lecture which, keeping everybody in mind, but then I need to make something, which will reach to all of them in the class. So coming to the changing pedagogy, that's what the topic says. So I thought of bringing a little bit of Langdell here. So do you know who is this Langdell? What's wrong with Langdell's method? What is this Langdell's method? Is there anyone who can just tell me who is this Langdell?
Sir, it is the case. Sorry, it's basically the case-based study that is used. I think there's Socrates and Langdell, if I'm not mistaken, where one is a question answer and the other is a case-based study methodology of teaching, especially in law.
You're right. You're right. In fact, Langdell is the last name of the founder dean of Harvard Law School. His name is Christopher Columbus Langdell. So why still today we remember Christopher Columbus Langdell is that he felt that law teaching should be changed. Right. And therefore, he introduced the case method of teaching law in the law school. And therefore, this is named after him. The case method is called as Langdell's method. Right? And this method was introduced somewhere in 1880, right? Which is almost 140 years ago. But, sometime when I go as part of the Bar Council of India inspection team to some of the law schools, I just, out of curiosity, say I'm a law teacher. I can only interact with the law teachers there, and then I casually ask them, is there any new method that you use to teach your students? Very proudly, they take their collar out and they said, yes, sir, we follow the case law method. Wow, after 140 years, you still follow case law method? That's great. So you believe in, preserving the heritage of law teaching. So this is something, it's very odd that, we are now in 21st century using a model of legal education that was developed in the later part of the 19th century. And it's high time that we need to think about it. Maybe a little coffee. Yeah. So you'll find that the entire nature of legal practice has changed. Tell me, students from a good law school, how many of them go for litigation? We believe that our entire law school curriculum, the teaching method is all case based, and then you teach them to be a litigating lawyer who will go to the court and argue. But you will be surprised to see that most of the law schools, many of them are going to do transactional work, and they don't even go to the court. In fact, my son who graduated, he refused to go to the court. I told him, I respect your feeling that you don't want to practice law, but then at least please go and enroll yourself. He was not even willing.
With your permission, may I interject, sir? Just for
yes,
a very small. What I personally feel, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm not from the academics background. I have been in the Judge Advocate General's Department of the Army.
Yes.
What I personally feel, sir.
Yes.
Today, everybody is only looking at NLUs.
Yes.
And the unfortunate part is, the good students coming out of the NLUs are not practicing. They are getting into corporate, or they're trying to have their own firms.
It's true, sir.
So you are at the hem of the affair, sir. you will have to bring the changes, sir.
True, sir. Yeah. So that is what, sir. I want to first believe in me, and then and through this program, I am just trying to understand from all of you, if I am speaking some sense, so that we can all together can sit together and work towards taking legal education to the next level. In fact, I know that legal education prior to Professor Menon setting up NLUs was quite different, and post Professor Menon setting up the NLS Bangalore, things have started becoming different. And that experiment is again 30 years old. The first experiment with what Professor Menon did at NLS Bangalore is 30 years old. He started the NLS in 1988, which is almost now how many years? 32 years. 32 years. I think now it's high time that we need to relook at the model of legal education that we think as great in this country. So that is where we need to look at all these things, like what are the changes which is happening in the legal practice, the nature of academic inquiry, the theory of education, the education field. A lot of changes are happening, but unfortunately, law teachers are not exposed to these changes. Whatever happening, whatever changes, the new theories of education, which is developed by the educationists, by the School of Education. The faculty of education in most of the universities, they keep innovating and coming out with the new models of law teaching, teaching methods, which our law teachers are not exposed to. So that is why I felt that I need to, at least, I'm just trying to provoke your thought. I don't want all of you to agree with me. I know that there are people still, huge fan of case law method, and they believe that case law method is the best method. I believe that case law method is certainly a new method. Sorry, it's a very relevant method even today. But completely relying only on that method and forgetting about innovating some new method is something which needs us to worry about. And therefore, that's what I said, that if you can read the last line in red, it says that we legal educators are still doing the same thing we were doing 140 years ago. So now it's time. It's high time that we start thinking about changing it. Because you can see one line before the last line, it says, the professional training programs in other disciplines have been redesigned many times to reflect the current practice. As I told, the engineering school, you see the changes which are happening in the engineering school, the changes which are happening in the medical school. How many times they have revised their curriculum? You see the medical school, how do they conduct their teaching, learning, assessment? Please look into how teaching, learning happens in the medical college. You will be surprised that they don't have a semester end examination. In all the 4.5 years of study, they have only 3 examinations. One is at the end of the first year, second is at the end of in the middle of the third year, after 1.5 years. Then they have one at the end of the 4 year and 6 months. So their focus is more on learning by doing, which ought to be the case even in the School of Law. But I'm just leaving all these things open. In fact, please do not think that I have all the answers for these questions. What I'm raising today, my job is not to find the answers independently, but of course, if you are all willing, we can sit together and then we can find answers to come out with a new model of legal education, which can take legal education in this country to the next. Today, I thought that I will make use of this opportunity to throw these questions to you, so that all of us can think, more of us can think, because I know it's very difficult for some of you to change. Change is very difficult, but then at least a few of you who feel that there is a need to change, please Let's think about it. So you see that, everything is changing. The law school buildings, we have some of the most modern and magnificent buildings, because universities spend a lot of money in buildings, right? But unfortunately, we do not, we do not understand that buildings are not universities. This happened when, I'll just quote a small story when the Gujarat Jnanpith was closed by the British, when Mahatma Gandhi was the chancellor of that university. So all the faculty members rushed to him and they said that the British government came and sealed our building. So the university is closed. What do we do? Gandhi simply asked those professors who came to him. So the British government, the British officers have only sealed your building, right? What do you mean by sealed the university? So they can only close your building. They can't, lock you up, or they can't lock the students. So if the building is closed, come on. I remember reading this when we have been asked to go under lockdown because of this pandemic. So we have been asked to stay at home. Students have been asked to go home and stay at home. But believe me, at least in those of these institutions where, students, the privileged students study, for them, there was a very minimal loss to teaching learning. Almost they did not lose anything. In fact, rather teaching learning happened very vigorously during this pandemic, especially during lockdown. Everybody stayed at home, and then we started continuing with our teaching learning through the technology means. I know that there are few students who are economically deprived, who could not have access to internet and access to technology, who had to really face problem. But then we also tried to come out with certain things by helping them with the internet connections and Android phones, so that they will be able to attend all these classes, and then they don't miss out on teaching learning. So that's what, you have very fantastic libraries nowadays. My entire library, that's what I was trying to explain. We subscribe almost, for example, at GNLU, my budget is almost, we are paying 1 crore of rupees only for electronic database. So we subscribe all these things, and these electronic database we made available to everyone, including the books. Now we went for ebooks, and then we gave a remote connection to remote access to all these students, so that they are all continuing to use. So we do all these things, we build beautiful buildings, we put air conditioners to it, we have remote access libraries with high tech, they have access to any material which is available in the world. They have the finest audiovisual equipments in the classrooms, and they have everything. But then when it comes to teaching law, I don't see that in wherever I regularly go for these inspections to law schools, I don't see that even the layout of the classroom is changed. Just Google for the image of classroom of any university some 100 years back, and similarly Google for images of classrooms today. Only difference you will find is the classroom is air conditioned. The furnitures might have a little bit of more cushion on it, but then the layout of the classroom still remains the same. Still, our classes are teacher-centric classrooms, when you put the layout of the class. And it's very it was very hard for me to know that when I did a study on law teachers, and I could see that most of them are not even familiar with the characteristics of the generation which is there inside the classroom. I think as law teachers, we should not only prepare some topic in law and go to the classroom. we need to study the student behavior, the behavioral shift in the classroom, and then we need to understand the general characteristics of millennials. And believe me, it's a proven science that millennials do not like, and in fact they get disturbed. Their attention, they can't retain the attention span just because your classroom is the way it is today. So that is why you go to any good hotel, maybe a 5-star property, to attend a conference. You don't have a theater style arrangement made. They don't, even a big conference, they put a round table and then they make people sit around the table and in different clusters. Because a theater style of classroom itself is an old model. And again, the present generation, the millennials, it's very difficult for them to sit in such organized manner. If you have children of that age group at your home, I hope you will understand that they don't believe in keeping things, in a very organized manner at home. They want their rooms to be cluttered, and it's again psycho. I can't tell you, otherwise I would have demonstrated you to all of you if you are all there in classroom, so that I could have explained it, but it becomes very difficult while I'm talking before a camera on a television screen. It becomes difficult for me to explain it, but then I just want you guys to visualize it. So the idea is that the educational approach, it essentially remains unchanged, which we need to change it. So that is the point that I want to drive home today. And that's what this is something which you can read. But it's a good news that many good law schools have already shaken up the curriculum, like Amity. I know more about Amity. I had a lot of good friends from Amity. So I know what's happening there at Amity. I know what's happening at Symbiosis. I know what's happening at Christ. I know what's happening at Jindal, right? So I keep looking at the curriculum of all these good private universities along with good universities. But then most of the places, but the examples that I'm telling you today is very, very, very small, very minuscule. But if you want to change the entire legal profession, the scenario of legal practice in this country, we need to bring in a sea change in most of the law schools. But only, very, very, very few law schools have shaken up, and then they are trying to do something new. And therefore, the rest of us, we need to have a broader discussion of what makes sense. So that we don't get locked into the same old approach that what our forefathers were following some 150 years back. So that is why. So I quoted Einstein earlier. This is what I said, when Einstein said about insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you do the same thing, you can't bring in any change in the outcome. So if you want to change, you will have to start doing different things. So therefore, the focus is to be shifted from teaching to learning. So here again, I quote Einstein, who says that I never teach my people. I only attempt to provide the condition in which they can learn themselves. Especially these millennial in the classroom today and the post-millennials who are going to come to the law schools from next year, you will see them that they hate people talking to them. They don't want us to teach. But then we need to make them learn. How do we make them learn without teaching them? Oh, teaching them to make them learn is only 1% of the method. There are 99 other ways by which you can make them learn. But what are these 99 other ways. That is something which we all need to sit and deliberate, and then, again, it can't be covered in 1 hour or the 1.5 hour session. So it takes time. How do we? Teaching is, of course, as I said, one method of making them learn, but there are 99 other methods, believe me. We tried a number of methods. Maybe next time when we meet in person, I can demonstrate that. And it's not only Einstein, I also found a beautiful quote by Winston Churchill, who also said this: I'm always ready to learn, but I don't like being taught. He belongs to a different generation altogether, but still see that. And this is exactly why I felt Churchill's quote is very important today, that I should bring it for discussion today, is that today's generation, the millennial who are there in the classroom, are exactly this. They are always ready to learn, but they hate being taught. So, that is why, my entire focus was on convincing you that today we are in a situation where we need to think about changing the way we need to teach law, because everything else has changed. The way we bank has changed. The way we book a cab has changed. The way we book a ticket has changed. But the way we teach law remains the same which was practiced 100 years. Again, today we are there and we are refusing to accept change. So that is what I thought I will make use of this time. So thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.